Hi, nice to meet you.
Welcome one and all. I'm Helena Kalenda. I direct the Asia program here at the Henry Luce Foundation, and have a long-standing friendship with the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, and are always delighted to host programs. I'm especially pleased to have Lin Jiang here, not only because of the fabulous work he's doing, but because he and my stepmom are neighbors in Berkeley. So
that's a real connection.
That's how we first got to know each other, and this came later. But in any case, I'm going to turn the program over to Dan Murphy. But glad everyone is here, and we really look forward to your remarks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Murphy, Director of Special Initiatives at the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, and certainly want to start by thanking Helena and Li Ling and our other old friends at the Luce Foundation for so graciously hosting us in this very nice conference room. We really appreciate that. This evening's program is on the Energy Foundation, which does work with sustainable urban development, transport issues, and energy issues in China. And I can tell you all, you're in for a real treat in speaking with Jiang Lin, the Energy Foundation's Senior Vice President. I've actually taken two groups from our Public Intellectuals program to meet with Jiang Lin. Our Public Intellectuals program seeks to better connect American scholars of China with policymakers and the public. And when we were in San Francisco, we visited the Energy Foundation's office, and they both came away raving about the meeting. So I'm sure that you all find it equally substantive and engaging tonight. And I think the unique thing, perhaps, about Jiang Lin and the Energy Foundation is not only is Jiang Lin very knowledgeable about sustainable urban development, transport issues, energy, etc., but his organization is also engaged in a wide range of local and national partnerships. So he has both that knowledge and that practitioner's eye. So a lot of very valuable lessons there to be shared. And with that, I think, Lin Jiang, you were going to speak for perhaps 25 minutes or so, and then we were going to open things to a question and answer session. So I'll just turn it right over to you.
Well, thank you, Dan. I want to thank Helena and the Luce Foundation and National Committee for organizing today's event. I'm really pleased to have the chance to share some of our work we've done in China with you tonight. Just a brief introduction about Energy Foundation, which is now a public foundation. But it was set up 22 years ago in the U.S. by three leading foundations to help the U.S. develop a comprehensive national energy policy. Around 1998, we were supported by the Packer Family Foundation to launch a similar program called China Sustainable Energy Program in China. It became operational in 1999. So we have now been in China for 14, 15 years. We're one of the first international group that's having established an operation in China. Today, we're the handful of international NGO foundation that's formally registered and recognized by the Chinese government, which for all the people who work in the NGO field understand the challenge that could be. So we do broadly speaking in several major energy using sectors in terms of policy work. We deal with buildings, transportation, industry, utility, renewables, climate programs. And today I'll talk about one of our programs in terms of urban design, urban transformation. We also have a very strong program now in air quality issues, which is somewhat related to our city's work as well. For those of you who are following events in China, you will know that's becoming a major issue in China in the last 2 or 3 years. So the challenges ahead of us are very familiar to, I'm sure, to all of you and people who are China watchers. China today is about 50% urban. In the next 20 years, roughly 300 to 350 million people will move from countryside to cities. That's essentially building the entire U.S. in the next 20 years. So I give you the scale, and in terms of speed and scale, it's probably the largest human migration in world history. And how do you do that in a sustainable fashion to both preserve the culture, the heritage, and leave the minimum impact on the environment is tremendously challenging. The problems are, very well documented. So that was the 100-kilometer traffic jam occurred 2-3 years ago outside of Beijing. Many of you probably seen that. And air pollution in the last 2 years has really gotten to a crisis level in my mind. There's much greater energy security concerns. Oil dependency in China has reached over 60% by now, and rising. And the land use pattern that you're seeing all over China today are not very promising. This is a typical shot of what we call a superblock development in China. The streets are, the block size are typically 400, 500 yards on each side. And in a typical block, there are single-use residential towers, 20 to 30 towers put together with very little amenities. So imagine you live in one of those complexes. And that's roughly about 10 or 20 city block here. And oftentimes it's surrounded by a wall. So there's no way for you to actually get out of your own complex on foot. There's no way for anybody else to walk through your neighborhood because it's been walled off. So this presents tremendous problems, both in terms of mobility, but also segregation and isolation of social life. And that's slowly being spread.
Excuse me, what's the purpose of those walls? Security or?
Yes, security, privacy, and the major driver for those.
So there's a crime issue in China that I'm not aware of?
Of course there's crime issue, but it's probably not comparable to anything we see in the U.S. And so there is perceived crime issue. Probably it's more important in deciding those walls. This is a typical shot of a street in China, very wide street. Typically, because you can easily land a 747 on the street. But if you're one of the pedestrians trying to cross the street, it's almost impossible, right? How many people have been to Beijing before? Like almost all of you are in Beijing. Have you ever tried a crossing China? Haven't you? So we joke about in Beijing that it takes a 100-meter sprinter to get across in one signal change. And this is the kind of problem it creates. It's human unfriendly city design. Again, this is the way people try to cross. There's no, and here's the traffic situation. Oftentimes in cities, there's very uncoordinated development. So we have taken an approach to try to tackle this issue from a variety of angles. We started this work roughly 80 years ago. In 2005, we first brought the BRT concept to China. This is a south-to-south exchange, invented in South America. We thought it was great. We took to China in 2005.
I'm not sure if everybody knows what BRT is.
That's all right. Thanks, Dan. It's a bus rapid transit. Essentially, it's running metro on the ground. Right? You run bus system like you run a metro system. So there are dedicated lanes, there's stations, there's pre-boarding, there's pre-ticketing, and the bus are designed like a metro cars. So all for delivering the maximum amount of pedestrian and passenger traffic in the short amount of time. In contrast to subway and metro system, it costs about 5 to 10%. The reason it was invented in South America because people were too poor to build subways and metro stations. They had to find other ways, and it was too poor to build freeways as well. So this is what they came up with. So we started with that, but roughly about 6 years ago, with support of the Henry Family Foundation, we launched an entire integrated initiative called Sustainable Chinese Cities Initiative. and try to address both the land use planning issues, the transportation planning issues, and the building design issues all together. To us, these are the fundamental structure of the city. Once they are built, it's very difficult to change. Right? So this have a high blocking potential. That's why I want to tackle them first and foremost. The other system, even the energy supply system, you can rebuild. It's actually not too hard to rebuild them. But once you lay the street grid together down, it's very difficult. I mean, New York Manhattan street grid was laid out 200 years ago, and it's thinking about changing that today. And we also taken away that following our observation how change happened in China. China in the last 30 years has gone through enormous change with huge amount of dynamism, I think, partly because people are willing to learn and adapt. They bring new ideas from around the world. They try them in one place to see whether it works or not. And if it works, and then they summarize and replicate across country. So we're taking a similar approach in choosing a handful of cities we work with first to see whether this idea will work in those cities, and then try to bring them to nationwide, either through national policies, incentives. Dan was asking me earlier whether the incentive. Yes, we're going to develop some incentives for the replication effort. But first, seeing is believing. People want to see whether this great idea will work or not, because many of the ideas you'll hear about sounds very straightforward, very simple. Why are they not done? That's the critical challenge we'll talk about. So then in the last, we have both scan around the world for the best practices, but also learn from our practice in China in the last 70, 80 years, and keep up with a design philosophy we call planning city for people. Really turn the design approach around. Everything we do is focused on the people in the city, not the cars, not the buildings, and the people. That's what we need to serve, and make a livable city for people. And we came up with 8 principles that, in our mind, roughly gets it very quickly. Well, I'll talk some of them in depth, but just for now, just go over them together. First of all, is develop a neighborhood and promote walking. Right? That sounds really simple, but it's really a fundamental reorientation of design focus. Those super blocks with 20, 30 towers together, you cannot walk. Right? So every trip starts with walking. Right? So, And second, really, is prioritizing bicycle networks. We can design great subways and all that, but Chinese cities, or to some extent cities in Asia, are huge metropolises. You have to get people on foot, on bicycle. Just building buses and subways are not enough. You need to really revitalize the bicycle network. And China was the kingdom of bicycles. I think it's our hope China become again the kingdom of bicycles in the next decades or so. The third principle is to create dense network of streets and passes, which really means permeability. You can actually go through a city very easily, multiple choices here. Compared to the super block approach, we want to build a small block, smaller street, so easy to cross, easy to walk around. Fourth is really about supporting high quality transit. The high quality are the key words here, because as people become wealthier and they're striving better quality of life, you just can't really picture someone go to that crowded air conditioner bus. You got to provide a high quality service so people will choose the transit instead of driving. Right? Private cars are very comfortable space. Everything is conditioned for your preference. So we need to provide a high quality alternative to that, whether it's transit, whether it's a safe, comfortable riding environment for bicyclists. Number 5 is truly practice mixed use. Right? This is one of the fundamentals to solve traffic jams. If you can truly make sure there's job, housing balance in a reasonable radius, making sure your communities have the job opportunities, place to live, place for service, and then you don't need to travel so far. A major city like Beijing, have one single central business district is a disaster for traffic management, because every day you see people come in, they go out. No matter what you do, it's going to be a miserable experience. The sixth is match the density with transit capacity, which is actually very subtle, right? And I'll talk about with some example later on. I think it would be much more easy to understand. And here's easy to think about: walking neighborhood, bicycle network. I want to just point out on the second chart, you notice there's both safety separation between the bicyclist, and also the bicycle are actually ahead of the cars at the traffic light crossing. So when the light turns green, you actually have a decent chance to go across. Right? Otherwise, this guy's going to cut you off. Right? So so that's very minor, very subtle change in design. But focusing on here, it's a bicyclist you're trying to serve, not the car drivers, right? Making sure you give them priority. In some cities, people even give bicyclists, the green light first. Let them, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, they take off first. Then car can get it going. So, and this is important for many of you who experienced Beijing in the past. They used to have wonderful bike lanes. So what happened to them? They didn't disappear. They just take more by cars because those bicycle lanes are too wide. So if they're too wide, car can get in, they will. And so you want to make sure that you have a separation, but also the lane need to be narrow enough so there's no way for car to navigate in that space. So this is kind of a very careful thought has to be put into thinking about how do you serve bicyclists, right? And this is a typical street shot in China today. Not fancy commercial strip, but with minor modification, it can become a very nice environment for bicyclists and pedestrians. Here's the little design change we did. You can see before. This is after. Okay. So you're going to separate space for bicyclists. You have a very even space for pedestrian and bike walk across. They don't have to go up and down anymore. Right? They go straight flat for them. So it's really some little change really helps pedestrians. It helps the sort of the walking and biking experience. Imagine you have shade over the bike lanes, right? Shading from the weather and sun, and that can be very pleasant. In Kunming, the new town Changgung, which we had a first breakthrough 3 years ago, we're planning an entire bike lane network, so you don't never have to intersect with cars. This is making that easy, making them safe, making them comfortable. Then, of course, you'll choose them. You're going to keep biking for longer. So this is a design principle we implementing in this Kunming new town. On the right is the old design. On the left is our new design. The overall shape is very similar, but you can see it's becoming much denser, a much denser network of streets and blocks. And there's several advantages of that, right? It's much easier to truly mix use when you have a finer block to work with. And also it's much easier to walk across. You don't have wide boulevard here anymore. And that's a major challenge.
Is it being built up to that model?
Right now they're in the implementation stage. So this in Kunming we have gone the furthest. Not only with the design was accepted by the city government, is being translated into zoning laws, and now it's being attached to the land transaction contract. So that's going to ensure they'll implement. Mixed-use neighborhood. This is probably very familiar to most of you. To walk through the traditional neighborhood, there's real mix, right? You can get your vegetables, meat, just around the corner. And oftentimes in today's redevelopment in cities, they're just being flattened, right? There'll be a high-rise, fancy, super expensive luxury complex built on top of that, and eliminate all the local flavor, the history, the culture, and become very unaffordable, right? It's the entire gentrification model, right? So we want to make sure your redevelopment, you want to upgrade amenities, but you want to keep the local flavor and culture and history. So that's one critical challenge. This is, as I said before, the typical pattern today: single-use apartment blocks, very wide street. Now, this is the one, the subtle point about matching transit capacity with development density. Right? And on the left, I think it's a Curitiba. You can see that in the middle, along the corridor, the transit corridor, there are a lot of high rises. The development density is very high. Okay? Build a lot of both apartment buildings and commercial offices. But as you move away from the transit corridor, as you lose your transit capacity, the building becomes much lower, less developed, because you can't serve them, right? And then you don't need it either. Which this way of development gives the city really very differentiated skylines. In many cities today in China, it's flat, it's cross, 30-story high or 50-story high. There's no distinguished differentiation between different districts. It's very flat. So you want to make sure that you can develop with support of transit capacity. Otherwise, you cause congestion. You can't move the people if you're not close enough to high capacity transit, whether it's BRT, subway, light rail. You need all of that in many of the big cities in China. On the right is Guangzhou, when the BRT corridor is built. So here's sort of a conceptual design in terms of how you want to think about it. The TOD, the transit-oriented development district and centers. The red lines are metros. So when the two metro lines intersect, there's a lot of transit capacity, and that's where you're going to build the highest density offices, commercial facilities, and residents. And when you move away from that, green lines are the bus transit lines, and then you build less. So if you're thinking of the city in that way, you can truly design a lot of facilities within 15 minutes radius from a major transit hub. So this is, again, before and after in Chenggung. You can see the different color represent different usage. So on the right, you can see there's much better mixing of different colors. So you achieve this mixed use much nicer than what's on the left. And I'll go through that. Here are some of the non-motorized transit work we've done, both in terms of bike lanes and also passes. In some cities, pedestrian paths are incredibly important part of social life and community life, and easy for people to move around. In Chongqing, for example, it's very hilly. If you go around the street level, you're going to circle around quite a bit to get anywhere. And so they have many passes. Those paths are very much alive, and they're sort of somewhat of a community center in many ways. But oftentimes they're really not in good condition. And so we have done some work to really upgrade the facility, providing lighting, seating, and some community center development around those passes to restore their vitality. And this is a really, really fun thing to see in Chongqing right now. Some of you probably have seen even the automated walkways in Hong Kong, right? I think that's the next step to really help people to move around, because there's a lot of older people in this neighborhood. The hills are really steep. You got to make sure they can get on top of that pathway. So thinking about people as the customer of your design service are really important to make this work. Otherwise, they're just beautiful benches no one to sit on. BRT, the bus transit network in Jinan, is becoming a model for Chinese cities. Jinan was interesting. We succeed not entirely by design. It was one of the first cities we worked with, but also because geology is in our core. Jinan, as you probably know, it's called spring cities, right? There are many springs underground, so they can't do the subway. So, all the mayors love subway metro project because they're a big ticket construction project that bring employment, tax base, other opportunity for the official in charge. But in Jinan, they couldn't really do it, so they actually stick with the BRT plan we helped them design, and they have developed beautiful network of BRT corridors. There are 6-7 corridors now, covering entire city. So you can actually get on one network, one bus, and transfer to other type of city as well. So it's becoming, 3 years ago during the national game time, that was a major transportation mode to deliver all the participants to the game. This is the Guangzhou you've seen before in the picture, and one of our partners, Institute for Transportation Development Policy, helped Guangzhou redesign this part of the the bus network. And this is what was improved afterwards. It's dramatic improvement in terms, at least that part of the Guangzhou, the traffic flow really starts to change. One of the nice thing about BRT is, if you fully implement the gold standard BRTs, you can deliver as much passenger traffic as metro station. People say, oh, it's too simple, not fast enough, cannot deliver enough people. Not true. You can do a lot with BRT at a cost, 5 to 10% of metro. Right? The only thing against it is that you don't bring as much investment to the city if you do the BRT. And initially, there's a lot of resistance from drivers, right? Both in Guangzhou and Jinan, there's a lot of complaint from automobile drivers. The buses are taking over the street space. Of course, why not? Think about it. The street are public property. They're not set aside for automobile drivers. So, understand that concept. I think it's important to think about how do you allocate public resource to serve the majority of the citizens in the city. And I think that orientation, I think, is critical in thinking about using the limited resource. That's the Jinan BRT network line. So I should stop here probably then. And this is a conceptual design for Kunming, and we did a few other things for other cities as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lin Jiang. And I think I'll start off by asking the first question, then we'll just open it to the floor. I wanted to know, you mentioned Kunming, Chongqing, Jinan, a couple other cities. For those cities that have been most successful with these sustainable urban planning concepts, what are some of the common factors that allow them to be successful? What common attributes do they have?
Well, number one, they need a visionary mayor, a leader in the city who can embrace a different path forward. And these are not easy things to do. This is against the traditional development approach. It's much easier for the city to stamp approval to sell large tract of land to developers. They get the revenue back very quickly. Much easier for developers to cookie cutter do the 20 buildings. I remember, early on in my tenure at the foundation, we received a delegation of leading developers. That one guy admitted that it took him the same amount of time to do one LEED-rated green building than 20 other buildings. Because otherwise, he doesn't have to think. It just chop, 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 and it's done. And just really thinking through, it's very hard. Second, the infrastructure supporting this implementation has to have an open mind, not just the mayor. You've got to have the planning bureau, transportation bureau be open to new ideas. This is all against the traditional way of doing things. I remember the first BRT line we helped build in Beijing, and there was a major resistance from the police department, right? It's going to mess up their whatever traffic management system. It's not the same way, right? And it didn't mess up the system, just it wasn't the same way it was done before. It has to be, we brought in the mayor to break the kind of interdepartmental negotiation on those issues. Because oftentimes people are making significant investment in public transit. They're not aligned with land use planning at all, right? They're run by a different department. So someone need to bring them together. And I would say the third part is you really need a strong partnership between the private and public sector, particularly NGO actors, to provide the constant persistence advocacy to make this work. Because oftentimes, if you just hire a designer, it's designed beautifully, but it's never getting adopted. It's shelved. So many people have done great designs, never seen the light of day. It's somewhere in the library.
So questions, and if people could just identify themselves when they ask the question. We have 1, and then 2, 3.
My name's Tim Alch. I'm with Berryville Bureau. We're actually quite vested and interested in the China minerals mining is what we focus on. Energy as well. Question that I enjoyed your presentation very much. Thank you. Question I have in my mind, I never heard you use the word moped or motorbike. And my understanding is that through policy, and I may be mistaken in all of this, decisions that I understood were being made at what level of the country, I'm not quite sure. Mopeds and motorbikes, which kind of replace bicycles or are in concert with bicycles, are being switched over to batteries so that there's not emissions being generated, which is a wonderful thing for lithium and other
minerals
storing energy. And I was just curious, I mean, I didn't see any even pictures of mopeds or motorbikes, and am I completely mistaken? Are they there or not? And I will admit, I've never been to China. The one person in this room.
Well, I'm sure people who went to China early on in the 80s have seen motorcycles, and but you couldn't find any survivors who rides a motorcycle from the first batch. It's just kidding. But I think it's a case that it's true that motorcycles are not very much used in the city anymore. It's totally banned, in fact. The countryside, most cities are banned.
E-bike, there's tons of
electric bikes.
e-bikes.
Right. Let's talk about gasoline-powered motorcycles.
Gasoline, right? The engine, the combustion engine.
Right. Those are, they're all banned already.
But are they switching? My understanding is there's 120 million being pumped out each year now to replace the gas combustion.
Right. So there are a lot of e-bikes in China. Right. Battery-powered bicycles, and that's very popular.
Right.
And they use the bus lanes. The bike lanes.
Use bike lanes. Right.
We've got a question from the gentleman in the back of the room there. Yes.
Hi.
And if you could.
I'm Ben Moore. I'm an architect. I thought I'd kind of flip the question. What do you do with, flip the first question, what about the cities that haven't been the biggest successes in maintaining integrated mixed-use neighborhoods and fine networks and new homes and things? Is there any discussion about how to re-intervene in let's say a vast Beijing superblock and try to put little bits of character and humanity back into it?
I think it's very challenging. And there are a lot of cities who are in that sense. In some ways, the new superblock is kind of it's a very mutation from more contemporary superblock, which are in fact very mixed-use centric. So you remember in old days before market reform, all the work unit provide housing and services, right? So if you're a factory, you have your own school, your own hospital, your own markets, your own dining hall. So everything happened in that so to speak, super block. It's very difficult for other people to go through, but for people who live in there, it's actually fairly convenient. Right? The new mutation is single-used, just residential. It's tough. I think it's very difficult to retrofit those. And but it's not. There are solutions. The question that people need to be open, because the new solutions are just different than the way you used to think. And especially about the walls, right? For example, crime rate in China compared to U.S. is so much lower, but the perception-wise, that wall become very central to the property owners, to their sense of belonging, community, and security. So that's that's a much deeper barrier we need to break.
I hate to introduce Japan into this, but having lived in Japan for several years, the Tokyo metropolitan area is still the biggest metropolitan area in the world, still bigger than Shanghai or Beijing. And yet they have an integrated bus and subway and suburban rail system. I'm wondering why this isn't a possible model for big Chinese cities, particularly in terms of supplementing the subways with suburban rail, not far into city rail, but suburban rail and subways.
No, I think it is applicable. I think the transportation system in Tokyo is unparalleled. Right? It's very well organized. But whether it's the best laid out city is a question, right? So I think when we have a chance to really look at greenfield development, you want to think about how do you create a city that's very livable, it's very lively, you invite social interactions, it's going to create that kind of a vibrancy that cities are known for. So I think that's a really real challenge. It's not just a design solution. I think it takes much greater engagement from all the stakeholders, including the civil society folks, to figure out how do you make your city work. I can't tell you, right?
Did you have a question?
You just mentioned greenfield cities, and you showed the Kunming, a new city. You also showed Guangzhou, old city. Talked about the Superblocks, hard to retrofit. So I'm wondering where you're putting most of your energy. Is it in the new cities that are springing up, or is it old cities, or a combination?
It's a combination, but probably more effort are in the new district or a new city, right? So like Kunming wasn't a new city, but it's a new district city.
Yeah.
So that offers easier entry in some ways. And with the newer, with old district, there's even greater complexity to work through with the local people, with people who already bought the rights to the land, and it's a much more complex city policy you have to work through. With the new cities, new district, at least you have a chance to lay out your grand vision. In Chongqing, in the spring, we had a session with local government and design institute to work through some of these issues. One of their challenge was, well, we sold that piece of land already to someone as a commercial development. Now you're telling me there's too much job in that district. I need to flip them to a housing block. Well, that guy's going to lose a lot of money if he do that. So it's becoming very difficult negotiation with, the entire community, and how do you rezone things. Right? So that's a very typical problem right now in major cities. They design or they allocate too much space for commercial development, not enough for housing in terms of balance, right? So you have a just right ratio between the two.
Hong Yang?
Yeah, my name is Hong Yang. I teach environmental sciences and for the plan, you want to see bicycles are being brought back to China. I think one thing I still remember from my childhood, I used to ride bicycles over maybe in free time. But do you think that take a carbon revolution to bring it back so against the conventional thinking and planning? I was in China 2 months ago. I watched a popular show. The girl was saying a famous line. Said she'd rather crying within the BMW rather than riding on a bicycle. So how do you think that is that reality or is it a reliable goal for you guys?
Well, you use the right word. It does take a cultural revolution to change people's mindset about, car is such a status symbol right now in China or everywhere else in the world, right? So, but it's not irreversible, right? I spend, 2 hours a day riding bicycle in Manhattan. So if you can do it in Manhattan, the most dense urban area in the U.S., why can't you do it in Beijing?
You should read some of the editorials. There's a bit of a cultural revolution.
Yeah. So I think it's doable, but the key question is combination. You need both the cultural change, but also you need to do the infrastructure development. So you have to be safe, sound, comfortable. Why would you dare ride a bicycle, if it's not safe? That's the number one thing. You got to create that infrastructure before behavioral change can take hold and take root again. So that's why in some of our work we focus first, on laying out the right infrastructure. We in fact, have engaged a partnership with the Ministry of Housing, Urban Development in China to have pilot program in different cities. The first year 6 cities, next year was another 6 cities. So both 12 cities finished their design guidelines on how to roll out the biking system in their city, and we're going to add to a public rental program on top of that. We may be rolling out to 30 to 40 cities next year. So this thing can be brought back again.
You, Joe?
Okay, my name is Yu Zhou. I'm a geography professor at Vassar College. I have urban planning background. I really love your presentation very much because early this year, I'm doing research on green building. So early this year, I was in China visiting various planning places and so on. And I find actually very discouraging, and what you were saying, and the principle you laid out make perfect sense. But it seems to me that how that principle penetrated in even the planning circle and the mayors, even in new development, it seems to me very difficult. I remember seeing, when you say the planning city for people, I remember seeing a presentation of future of Nanchang, this new district, and beautiful skyscrapers, white street, and the only thing missing is people in it. There was no people. There was like a couple holding one child and walking on a very wide street. So, and then people who accompany me say, "Oh, you should see this all over China. This is all the vision. This is the vision. There's no people in it under these cities." So, it just seemed to me a really difficult thing to sort of penetrate into people's mind. But I'm wondering, beyond your foundation's wonderful work, they are, the Chinese government is promoting what's so-called eco-cities, right? And there's supposedly 200 cities applying for eco-city status. So I'm wondering whether these kind of top-down government saying, we need to be green, does it create that kind of, you need really a cultural revolution happen quickly for planet at least. So do you think that works? Are you seeing people's mind changes? Because some of your Superblock idea, non-Superblock idea, when we were in Hangzhou, they've been criticizing the Beijing Superblock for decades. It still doesn't prevent many cities adopt the Superblock. They said it's because Beijing has Liahui, all the mayors came to Beijing and say, "Oh, big block, that's what we need. A big street, that's what we need." So even though for planners, professional planners, they knew this is a problem for a long time. So I'm just wondering to what extent these are changing, whether the Chinese government, the eco-city push is changing it.
I think, you had raised a great question. It's going to take a long time to answer. But to simply put, I think having the the highest level leadership paying attention to this problem, definitely will push the system to perform better. That's clear. Second, but it's not changing fast enough. I totally agree with you. Right? This is the fundamental challenge we face in China, because the speed of change is so fast. Can we act fast enough? Bring enough people along fast enough to reverse the course? It's going to be a huge question to be answered. And we're doing our part. And for example, we're creating a university alliance for all the major design schools in China to come together to train their people. We have to target about a few thousand people a year to be trained under that program. We're working with the Mayor's Academy, we're training mayors as well. But so far, I don't believe it's enough in the sense that people really want a powerful example to show. Right? Because the concept is so simple. They couldn't really grasp with that. They actually really want to see a model. So we're working very hard to get the one model city built. But as you know, it takes such a long cycle, right, to do the design, then auction the land, and then build it. So when we made the first breakthrough 3 years ago in Kunming in terms of getting the design accepted, it just takes now. A 2 developer bought 2 tracts of land. We're starting implementing some of that. It's even then, it's not 100% risk-free yet. So. But I think that what we are hoping to do is learn from the pilots and start design the national policies in terms of incentives to accelerate adoption. For example, we're helping the Ministry of Housing and Construction to set up an incentive fund to provide cities who are willing to build entire district with green buildings. Look at 50 million RMB as incentive. Well, that counts. 50 million. That's, I don't know, not quite $10 million yet, but it gets them somewhere. So there's a lot of people applying for that. If you do that, you have to follow the code, right? The entire district of the building, not just a single building, has to follow the green building design guideline. So we're hoping this, as we start developing, learn from the model, we're creating on the side technical design guidelines. For example, street design manuals. Very technical, very mundane. What's the ways the city, what's the ways the street you should have? How do you use that? How much for bicycle lane? How much for bus lane? How much for cars? There's all kind of detailed work we're doing with a whole network of partners in China. Today we work with roughly 150 institutions in China on a variety of issues. So they're doing a lot of work on the ground to summarize all the experience we learned, and hopefully that be used for all the design schools in the future.
Did I see a hand in the back of the room? Jan?
Jan Barris with the National Committee. It's quite extraordinary what you're doing. And I'm just wondering, can you give us a little more sense of the practicalities of how to go about doing that? What magic are you working, first of all? But I know you don't have a giant staff, so what's your staff? I know you have an office in Beijing, you have it in other cities. Is most of your design work done here, done there in conjunction with other Beijing planners or individual city planners? And then just the follow-up. How do you then sell your design, sell your ideas, and how do you identify the places where you think they're likely to be accepted?
Those are excellent questions. So the foundation itself has roughly 85 staff in total between U.S. and China. And China staff right now is about 35 foundation staff. They're mostly in Beijing. Then we have built our own design center now. There's about 13, 14 engineers and planners. It's a separate, kind of a local NGO we help set up.
In Beijing?
In Beijing.
Based
in Beijing.
Local Beijing run or?
Exactly. Local Beijing registered non-profit corporation that does the real-time, 24/7 support for cities. So they actually being dispatched every day to different cities to do the work. And our approach is very much a partnership model. We don't do this work alone. We bring the best firm in the world. We also engage local firm as well. So it's a three-party team. For example, we bring Young Gal Associates, which is the best sort of a urban designer on a streetscape, bike lane kind of work in the world, from Denmark. So we use their talent. We have our own team. All the engineers are trained in the U.S. and Europe, and then go back, work for us. And then we work with the local. In each city we work, there's local design institute we engage. So it's a three-party team that really implement. The small piece of land you saw in Kunming, to get it down to an implementation design, it takes a huge amount of manpower to actually do the drawing, not just do the conceptual design, to do the construction drawing, it's cost you millions of dollars in terms just to pay for the design fees, right? The developer paying, we're not paying for that. So it means a huge amount of work. So we're really thinking about the partnership model, who we work with. In terms of engagement, we, of course, that's part of our business, understanding local dynamics. Who are the champions? Who are in line with our thinking, with our model? Who are, be open to new ideas. So we do a lot of engagement. In China, we have built a two-layer advisory council to help advise us on where to go, what topic to work on. So these are very senior folks inside and outside the government who understand what is going on, what's needed in China. So we have regular consultation with them to understand what priorities coming up. So we also, there are also cases we tried, didn't quite work. We just have to, leave. Cut our losses, move on to the next thing. But what you touched on is one of the fundamental challenge of working in China, because the speed of leadership change is so fast. No one stayed in a position very long. This is an enormous challenge. Since the mayor of Kunming we work with, our first champion endorsed our ideas, he's to move on quite a long time ago. Even his successors moved on. And the planning bureau chief moved on 3 times. So each time you got to re-educate, re-engage. So it's this is not a do once work. You have to be there all the time.
So also this isn't cheap. So if you're bringing the best designers from Denmark, your developers are paying for that and they're willing to do it? Or
we're evolving our model. Some, right now, a lot of the cities are paying part of it, and the developer, of course, when you're down to implementing the actual building design, developer are paying for it. Right? So the conceptual design part oftentimes is a partnership between us and the city. So we cost share some of that. This is the very first part of design, the layout, the concept. And then there's a couple layers of design. But by the time it gets to land is sold to developer, they want to build, oftentimes they hire us back to do that work for them, and they pay entire cost. And they don't have to hire us. There's many people they can choose to hire from the field, but because relationship you build over time, we do something like that.
See, we've just got a couple minutes left, and I saw 3 hands, so maybe we'll just collect up those questions together, and you can respond to them. John, Sarah, and this gentleman in the back.
I was just wondering, with development in China, it seems like vanity projects are kind of the name of the game. And about a year ago, I suppose, we were hearing a lot about Changsha's the Sky City, housing 174,000 people. I'm looking at your 8 principles here. Perhaps that's, I don't know if it meets any of your principles. It seems like a nightmare for a developer. So I'm wondering, is that an aberration where that's a single developer's vanity project? Is that even going forward, or are we going to be seeing more and more of these single building monstrosities where you never have to go outside.
Sarah?
Sarah Gavrikchi, the Environmental Grantmakers Association. You were talking about developing a model, and I was wondering, are there any cities currently in China that serve as a relatively decent model that we can look to as an example today?
We have a bad model.
You have a bad model.
Jiang Lin from the United Nations. Thank you very much for your most exciting presentation. I don't have a planning and architecture background. I recently been to an exhibition at MoMA, which is about 9+1 ways of being political, which reviews the past, all the architectural designs over the past 50 years. And they identified the salient seeds. And I found that was quite fascinating. So in relation to your presentation, as we see China is undergoing this urbanization at such a rapid speed, what's your reading about some salient trend in terms of design philosophy when it comes to large urban planning and residential housing projects?
That's a tough question.
So you've got the vanity projects.
I understand you have this A principle, but just in terms of purely from the architectural point of view, I very much appreciate your point, your specific point on the mixed-use residential areas, the need to preserve, the older kind of neighborhood, while the China moves up to the modern world. So I just anxious to hear your views.
So we've got the vanity projects in the Changsha Sky City, the relatively good model, and the salient trends in design philosophy.
Yeah, those are very broad questions. Let me just try to wrap around my brain around them. I don't know when I can provide the simple answer for that. Oftentimes vanity project came from vanity ideas. Right? The developer didn't dream up the idea himself. It was actually architects, planners who dreamed those ideas. Those are actually being around for some time. So it just then when the vanity developer and vanity idea intersect, and then you have this phenomena of potential aberrations, I would say, in terms of thinking about human living environment, which is a very much, this is not a specific answer to your question, but thinking about the solution to the human, the challenge we human society face. Oftentimes is being simplified, shrinking to a technology solution. So this is the one that fits the model. We can solve your problem by giving you this building that has everything you need. Why do you ever want to go out? Why don't I hook you into a tube that feeds you all the information, all the sensation you're ever going to experience? You just keep you in the bed. So it's really about the human experience, right? And I think there's very fundamental philosophical differences in how do you approach human society. I don't know we're going to have an answer to that or not. I think we'll see what happens. Good models very hard to come by. Bad models are always there, all the time, and is being replicated. And this is one of the challenge I think for all of us to think through. Why does bad model spread as fire, right? I mean, Beijing is, in my mind, one of the worst cities in terms of design features. But everyone wants to build like Beijing. They love the Chang'an Boulevard. It's big and grand, right? So, I mean, it's a real challenge. And I think that's why we put this simple idea on the heading for our philosophy is really planning city for people. You got to shift your orientation, first of all. And then the solution will come if you get the right orientation of who you're trying to serve. In terms of the approach addressing this massive amount of urbanization, I think there's no simple solution to it. And all the problems we encounter today are based, in my mind, on a very simple belief we can find simple fixes for all the problems we have. You know, cities are extremely complex environment and systems, and takes multiple stakeholders to get engaged to figure out what's the resolution for it. So for someone to tell you, you know, here is the blueprint and do it, it's never going to work. So I think it requires the city to come together, to take its time to think about its own future, its own history, and how to build the kind of an environment you want to live, not anybody else.
Well, I hope everybody will join me in thanking Lin Jiang for a very engaging discussion.